"Don't touch the tracks," the black boy said. Seconds later, Cora Bly heard the train coming. She had already lifted one foot over the nearer rail. The iron looked dead, the way old iron always looked after years of rain and dust, brown at the edges, black along the top, where no wheel should have polished it for decades. Grass had grown between the ties and narrow blades. Queen Anne's lace leaned over the ballast. A locust shell clung to a spike head like a tiny burnt glove. There was no signal light, no crossing bell, no sign except a tilted board, half swallowed by vines, and the boy sitting above it on the rusted ladder of an old semaphore mast, watching her with both hands locked around the rungs. Cora froze with her shoe hanging in the empty air. The sound came up through the earth before it came through the weeds. It was not loud at first. It was a seam of pressure under everything, a low sewing machine hum running beneath the cicadas and the hot wind. Then the rail beside her foot gave a clean metallic tick, sharp as a tooth against a glass. The weeds along the curve bowed, not from weather, but from the breath of something moving fast through the cut. The boy slid down the ladder as if he had done it all his life. He landed in the ballast without a crunch, caught Cora's sleeve, and dragged her backward so hard her heel skidded out from under her. They fell together into the drainage ditch, his shoulder striking mud, her elbow striking stone. A second later, a train came through a wall of green. It had no horn. That was the worst of it. The engine was low and square, and painted a gray so faded it had become the color of old bone. Its windows were black. Its headlamp burned white even in the late afternoon glare, but the light seemed aimed inward, not out, trapped behind dirty glass. Behind it came 3 short cars loaded with sealed metal bins, each car rocking on springs with a steady, indifferent patience. The wheels did not scream. They whispered. They passed close enough for Cora to smell hot oil, wet rope, and the sour mineral odor of river mud baked on steel. She pressed herself flat in the ditch. Gravel snapped against her cheek. A stem of grass whipped across her mouth. The boy kept one hand clamped on the back of her coat, though the coat was thin as paper at the seams, and she was older than he was by 5 years at least. He did not let go until the last car vanished into the bend, swallowed by cattails and sumac, and the rails quit humming. Only then did Cora breathe. The boy stood first. He was small, narrow through the shoulders, maybe 13, with dark skin gleaming from heat, and a face that looked younger until he frowned. He wore a patched green shirt with the sleeves cut short, trousers held by cord, and a canvas satchel crossing his chest. A red bandana was tied around his left wrist, but dark blood had seeped through it and dried in a stiff edge. "You deaf?" he asked. Cora pushed herself up on one hand. Mud slid from her palm. Her pack, if it could still be called a pack, lay open in the weeds where she had dropped it. One sock, a dented spoon, and a folded picture torn from a seed catalog had spilled out. She gathered them before answering because hunger had taught her that anger spent energy faster than walking. "I heard you," she said. "Then why were you still putting your foot down?" "Because people yell things sometimes." Her throat scraped as she spoke. She had not had water since noon, except what she had licked from the inside of a rain barrel behind the closed feed store. "Usually they yell to scare you. That one doesn't need help scaring anybody." He looked toward the bend where the train had gone. He did not look proud of having saved her. He looked inconvenienced, as if she had added a hard sum to a day already crowded with bad arithmetic. Cora brushed grit from her cheek. The air in the rail cut held heat like a kiln. Above them, beyond the briars and bent fencing, the sky had the yellow weight of late August weather. Thunderheads were building over the river flats to the west, tall and dirty underneath, their bellies bruised green. Somewhere behind, Cora lay Bracken, the town that had refused her 2 hours of work because the packing shed foreman said A girl who would not give her real last address could not be trusted with peaches. Somewhere ahead lay a county road, or so she had hoped, and after that, any place that was not Bracken. She had followed the rails because rails always meant a town eventually. Now she was not sure they meant anything ordinary at all. "That line's abandoned," she said, because she needed the sentence to be true. The boy gave her a flat look. "You just saw it move. Old plant engine? No plant. Mine spur? No mine. Then what?" He turned away and climbed the ditch bank. "Not yours." Cora laughed once, dryly, but the laugh made her ribs hurt. She had walked since sunrise with 9 cents, a raw foot, and an order from Bracken's deputy to keep moving after she took bruised fruit from a discard crate. Almost nothing was hers, and still she wanted a reason for things. The boy knelt beside the tilted board under the semaphore. He pulled vines aside. The board had once been white. Black letters remained in patches, but not enough to read from where she stood. He took a stub of chalk from his satchel and made a mark on the post, one vertical line beneath 3 others. Cora watched him. "You count them?" "I count when they run wrong." "That was wrong." He did not answer. A hot gust came down the cut. It carried the smell of rain before rain existed. The boy looked up at the clouds, and for the first time, Cora saw fear loosen his mouth. She took the opportunity because fear made people more honest than pity. "I'm Cora." "I didn't ask." "What's yours?" He tucked the chalk away. "Micah." "Micah what?" "Micah, who told you not to touch the tracks." "That train going to come back?" "Yes." "When?" He listened, not theatrically, not with his ear to the rail like a picture book scout, but with his whole body still. Then he said, "Too soon." The words seemed to cost him something. He turned toward the cut where the train had disappeared and began walking along the ditch, keeping 3 long paces from the rail. He moved with a limp he tried to hide. Cora stood where she was. Leaving would have been wiser. But the boy had blood on his wrist, fear in his face, and knowledge of the only moving thing in a landscape that had pretended to be dead. "Is there water? Where you're going?" she called. Micah stopped. Cora hated how small the question sounded. After a moment, he said, "Some. Clean. If you don't touch what you're told not to touch." He walked on. This time she followed. The rail cut ran between high clay banks. Now that Cora knew to look, the track was not as abandoned as it pretended. Trimmed weeds, greased fish plates, porcelain insulators, thin wires ducking underground, and padlocked iron boxes stamped with a heron inside a gear. The boy never stepped between the rails. When brush crowded the ditch, he went down into mud rather than cross over. Once Cora reached toward a sapling to steady herself, and he snapped. Not that one, before her fingers closed. The sapling had wire stapled to its far side, the bark grown swollen around it. "You live out here?" she asked. "No." "You just patrol haunted trains for sport?" He glanced back. "You always talk when you're scared?" "Mostly when I'm thirsty." That nearly made him smile, but not quite. The cut widened. The rails bent toward a stand of cottonwoods whose trunks were black at the base from old floods. Beyond them rose the ruins of an ice house or warehouse, brick walls roofless, windows blank, a chimney leaning at an angle that made Cora uneasy. She expected the track to run past it. Instead, it ran into it. Not through a doorway, into a wall. The brick wall facing the cut looked solid, until Micah stooped beside a spill of broken masonry and pulled a lever hidden under a sheet of corrugated tin. Something inside the wall clicked. A vertical seam opened where mortar had been painted to disguise it. The lower half of the wall shifted inward on iron rollers, breathing out a cool, damp smell that made Cora's cracked lips ache for water. Micah slipped inside. Cora hesitated only long enough to notice the rail continued through the doorway, gleaming faintly in the dark. "Don't step on it," he said from within. "I'm learning the theme." Inside, the air dropped 10 degrees. The hidden passage was narrow, its ceiling arched with brick, its floor set with the same track. A walkway of planks ran along the left side, raised on iron brackets above a channel where water muttered below. The planks had been replaced in sections. Some were old oak, polished by use. Others were newer pine, carefully cut, marked with pencil measurements. Cora touched the wall. It sweated under her fingers. Micah closed the false wall. Darkness folded around them until he turned a crank on a little box beside the door. A bulb overhead warmed from dull red to yellow-white. Not electric the way town bulbs were electric, not steady and clean, but breathing with the turning of the crank until something caught. The light steadied. Somewhere, water spun a wheel. Cora stared. The passage led to a buried workroom. Brick pillars held the ceiling. Pipes crossed overhead. Shelves carried labeled tins, rope, lantern glass, ceramic fuses, folded canvas, and jars of nails sorted by size. A workbench sat under tools hung in painted outlines. On the far wall, a wire-covered map showed the line: East Sluice, Heron Gate, Number 6, Sand Drag, Bell Pocket, Long Weir. Beside it, a brass gauge trembled at 42 pounds. A small cot had been made up behind stacked crates. A tin cup sat beside it. A boy's jacket hung from a nail. "You don't live out here," Cora said. Micah dropped his satchel on the bench. "Not usually." That meant yes. He went to a blue hand pump bolted over a stone basin and worked the handle 3 times. Water came out in a clear stream. He filled the tin cup and handed it to her, before filling another for himself. Cora drank too fast. Pain flashed behind her eyes. She made herself stop, breathe, drink again. The water tasted of iron and stone and deep shade. Nothing in her life had ever tasted better. Micah unwrapped the bandana from his wrist with his teeth. The cut beneath was not long, but it was ugly. A torn crescent just below the thumb, swollen around grit. He rinsed it and winced without a sound. "Let me," Cora said. He pulled away. "I'm not a nurse," she said, "but I've cleaned worse." "On who?" "Myself." He considered that. Pride and pain argued across his face. Pain won. He let her take his wrist. On the shelves, she found a tin-marked gauze, another marked salve. The labels were typed, not handwritten, and protected under strips of yellowed varnish. Every object had a place. Every place had been chosen by someone who expected panic later and tried to make it orderly in advance. Cora cleaned the wound, picking out 2 flecks of rust with tweezers, while Micah stared at the map and breathed through his teeth. "How'd you cut it?" she asked. "Switch stand." "Rail switch?" "Number 6. You know switches, but not bandages." "My grandmother knows bandages. I know what she showed me before she got sick." Cora wrapped the gauze around his wrist and tied it with the red cloth, cleaner side in. "Where is she?" "County Hospital." "She coming back?" He looked at the gauge. People keep saying things like that when they want you to stop asking. Cora had no answer for that. She fastened the bandana and let go. Thunder rolled above the brick ceiling, softened by earth. Dust sifted from a pipe joint. Micah went to the map. His finger followed the red string from their room toward a point marked with a black triangle. "The train is supposed to run once at dawn when the river is high. It brings ballast bins from the upper shed down to the sand drag, dumps them, resets the gate weights, then goes back. It hasn't run in daylight since Graham was young. Today, it ran 4 times. What starts it? Water. That doesn't narrow it." He pointed at the gauge. Storm water fills the mill race. The wheel turns. Pressure climbs. When it hits 40, the governor releases the brake at Long Weir. Train rolls down to Heron Gate. A cable takes it the rest of the way. If the switch is lined right, it goes to the drag and dumps. If the switch is lined wrong, he moved his finger to a side tunnel beneath the warehouse. It comes here. Cora looked at the rail running across the room. It entered through one wall and vanished through another, passing not 6 feet from the shelves. The cot, the water pump. That thing can come through this room. Not if number 6 is set right. You said you cut your hand on number 6. He nodded once. Is it set right? His silence answered before he did. I got it halfway, he said. Then the handle kicked back. Another roll of thunder shook the room. The brass gauge trembled at 43. Cora set the medical tin down slowly. Micah. What? How long until it comes back? He listened again. In the room, listening meant more. The pipes clicked. The water channel under the planks slapped faster. Far away behind brick and earth, something heavy settled with a groan. Less than an hour, he said. The clever thing would still have been to leave. The false wall stood behind them. The storm had not broken. Cora could take water, climb the bank and run for the road. A runaway industrial train in a buried rail system was not her problem. A boy with a sick grandmother and a bleeding wrist was not her problem. The buried room, with its impossible order and cool, drinkable water, was not hers to save. But the thought of the train coming through this place tightened Cora's chest. Shelves crushed, lanterns under wheels, the pump split, and Micah trying again alone, because children left, too often learned to mistake solitude for bravery. What do we need? She asked. Micah looked at her sharply, as if she had spoken a word in a language he had heard only from far away. He opened a drawer beneath the map. Inside lay a folded sheet of oilcloth, stiff with use. He spread it on the bench. It was a plan, drawn in blue ink, of the track between the hidden room and number 6. Someone had written instructions along the margin in neat block capitals. Cora could read most of them. Never ground across rails, use duck boards, test lamp before crossing, keep clear of contact shoe, do not trust the return spring in freezing weather, do not force stand if red flag is visible. A corner of the sheet bore a name, Letha Grange, acting signal tender. Who's Letha? Cora asked. Micah's finger paused over the name. Graham said she kept the line alive when everybody else pretended it was never here. Why pretend? Because it was built by people they didn't want to pay and used by people they didn't want to save. Then he shook himself and pointed. We go along the service walk to Bell Pocket. There's a cabinet with insulated boards. We cross at the broken drain, reach number 6 past the boiler sump, line the switch to the sand drag, and pin it, if the pinhole isn't sheared. And if it is, then we find out why Graham kept 3 kinds of swear words for old iron. Cora almost smiled. You got gloves? Micah handed her a pair from the bench. They were too large, stiff leather with rubber stitched across the palms. She put them on. He took a lantern, 2 duck boards banded in tarred canvas, a wrench as long as his forearm, and a little wooden case with a glass window and 2 wires coiled inside. What's that? Test lamp. How old is it? Old enough to trust if you don't drop it. They left the room through the far side. The service walk narrowed beyond the map room. Pipes crossed overhead. Water dripped into the channel below. Cora's shoe nail pressed into her foot every few steps, but she said nothing. Pain was information, like the smell changing from cool brick to warm metal and disturbed mud. Micah moved faster than she expected with his limp. He counted under his breath at each iron box they passed. At the 3rd, he stopped and clipped the test lamp wires to 2 studs. The little bulb stayed dark. Safe? Cora asked. Safe enough. That phrase has killed people. So has waiting for perfect. They continued. At Bell Pocket, the walkway ended. A section of planking had fallen into the water channel, leaving 12 feet of open space beside the rails. The channel below was only 4 feet down, but the water in it moved fast, black and flecked with foam. On the other side, the walkway resumed, slick with algae. The track ran between 2 rails over ties dark with moisture. Above the gap hung a sign painted in red, board crossing only. Micah set one duckboard down across the ties. It was made of thick wood with rubber feet, wide enough for one cautious step. He set the second ahead of it, forming a staggered path that touched the ties, but not the rail. Then he clipped the test lamp to the rail, and a grounding stud. The bulb flickered once, faint as a firefly. He went still. Cora saw it and felt her mouth dry again. What does that mean? Return current. Can it shock us? If we give it a better path. How do we not do that? Keep both feet on the boards. Don't put a hand down. Don't let the wrench touch rail and wall together. He said it steadily, but his cut hand had begun to bleed through the bandage. Cora looked at the boards. They seemed suddenly very small. I'll carry the wrench, she said. Micah did not argue. That frightened her more than if he had. He crossed first. His feet knew the boards. He moved with knees bent, lantern held low, shoulder brushing damp air. Halfway over, the channel surged under him, sending spray against the rails. The test lamp brightened. Micah stopped with one foot raised and waited until it dimmed. Then he stepped to the far plank and turned. Cora followed with the wrench hugged to her chest. The boards shifted under her weight. She could feel the vibration of water through them, different from the train's vibration, but close enough to wake the memory in her bones. Her right shoe slid on algae. She caught herself by tightening every muscle at once, not by grabbing. The rail lay inches from her ankle, dull and patient. Slow, Micah said. I am slow. Slower than scared. She wanted to snap back, but the phrase helped. Slower than scared. She placed her foot, waited, placed the next. When she reached the other side, her hands hurt from gripping the wrench. They pulled the boards after them. Micah wiped rain sweat from his forehead with his good wrist. Your grandmother teach you all this? She taught me enough to stay alive if I listened. And did you? Sometimes. That was the most honest thing anyone had said to Cora in weeks. Past Bell Pocket, the tunnel changed. Brick gave way to poured concrete. The track sloped down. Watermarks striped the walls above Cora's head, each line labeled with a year in black paint. 1957, 1973, 1989, 2011. Beside some years were initials. RB appeared twice. LG appeared on the oldest line, written smaller, almost at the top. Cora lifted the lantern to see. Letha again, she said. Micah looked, but kept walking. She was here in the big flood. When was that? 31. Cora thought of that high black line above them. Water filled all this. Not all. She closed Heron Gate before it took the town side. Then why doesn't anybody know her name? Some names don't get put where rain can see them. It was not a child's sentence. It had been given to him. They reached a steel door, wedged open with a brick. Beyond it, an old boiler lay on its side in a hot chamber. Water roared under a grated floor. A flywheel turned behind a cage, driven by a belt that slapped once each rotation. On a work table beside the boiler, someone had left fresh marks and dust. Not Micah's small handprints, larger ones. A ring from a can. A scatter of stripped copper insulation bright as insect wings. Cora caught Micah's shoulder and pointed. His face closed. Someone's been here, she said. I know. You knew before. That's why I came today. The words landed heavily between them. From above came a muffled bang, then another. Not thunder. Metal on metal. Micah lowered the lantern. Cora's body understood hiding before her mind chose it. She pulled him behind the boiler. They crouched in the heat and listened. A man's voice drifted through the chamber from somewhere beyond the next passage. He was muttering, not to them, maybe to a bolt that would not turn. "Come on, you old church bell. Give! Give!" A scrape. A curse. Another bang. Micah's fingers dug into the wrench handle. Cora shook her head. The man came into view carrying a pry bar and a canvas sack. He was thin in a stringy way, with a beard the color of dirty straw and a hat darkened by sweat. One boot was wrapped in wire. He had a coil of copper cable over his shoulder and a pistol tucked into his belt. Not drawn, but present in the way a snake under a porch was present. His shirt had the name Orson stitched above the pocket. He crossed to an iron junction box and drove the pry bar under its lid. Micah made a small sound, almost breath, almost grief. Cora tightened her hold on him. The boy trembled with rage more than fear. Orson pried the lid up. Inside, porcelain blocks held neat runs of wire. He grinned as if seeing coins. The brass gauge in the chamber clicked. A bell rang once, far away. Orson jerked his head up. "No," he said to the room. "No, you don't." The flywheel quickened. Micah whispered, "He's cutting the return line." "What happens if he cuts it?" "The switch won't show occupied." "Meaning?" "The train thinks the track is empty even if it isn't." Cora looked toward the passage beyond Orson, toward number 6, toward the wrong-lined switch. The whole buried place seemed to inhale. They could not fight a grown man with a pistol. They could not let him keep cutting. Cora searched the room. Boiler, chain, old ash shovel, buckets, a rack of fire hose turned stiff with age. Above the work table hung a whistle cord, its label almost unreadable. Sump alarm. She pointed to it, then to herself. Micah shook his head fiercely. She nodded once, harder. He understood and looked furious about it. Cora slipped from behind the boiler, while Orson bent over the junction box. She moved along the wall, each step placed between puddles. The whistle cord hung 10 feet away. She reached for it and pulled with all her weight. The sump alarm did not whistle. It screamed. The chamber filled with a shriek so enormous it seemed to pass through bone instead of ears. Orson shouted and dropped the pry bar. The lantern in his hand swung wild. Micah darted from behind the boiler, grabbed the canvas sack of copper from the floor, and flung it into the roaring water channel. Orson saw him. "You little thief!" He lunged. Micah ran, not back toward Cora, but toward the passage to number 6, because fear in him had been trained into purpose. Cora snatched the pry bar from the floor and hurled it under the flywheel cage. It clanged between spokes. The wheel did not stop, but the belt jumped, snapping like a gunshot. Orson flinched and ducked. Steam or mist burst from a pipe seam. Cora ran after Micah. Behind them, Orson cursed through the alarm. The pistol did not fire. Maybe he had forgotten it. Maybe he did not want to shoot underground. Maybe the room, for all its age, still knew how to frighten trespassers into clumsy mistakes. The passage tilted upward. Micah was ahead, lantern swinging, breath hard. The wrench banged against Cora's thigh. The alarm faded behind them, replaced by a new sound ahead. A hollow clack, repeated, metal shifting under strain. Number 6 stood in a concrete alcove where the track split. The main rail curved left toward a tunnel marked sand drag. The right-hand rail ran straight toward the hidden room. Beside the points, the switch stand leaned the wrong way, its steel pin hanging useless from a chain, while the whole column shuddered under cable strain. Cora had seen switches in yards, had watched men throw them with casual muscle, while she sat, hidden under boxcars, or waited beyond fences for work that paid in cash. This one looked similar, but everything around it made it stranger. Wires ran to a signal box. A wooden rod disappeared into the wall. A glass-covered indicator showed 2 words, refuge and drag. The needle trembled near refuge. Micah clipped the test lamp to the stand. It glowed faintly. Bad? Cora asked. Bad. Can we still move it? Only from the insulated grip. The handle's wooden grip had split. A piece of it lay on the floor. That how your hand got cut? He nodded. The brass bell rang again, closer this time. Cora crouched to examine the base. The switch points, where one rail pressed against another to choose the train's path, were clogged with a wedge of gravel and rust flakes. Not enough to stop the handle entirely, but enough to keep the points from seating. Above the clogged joint, someone had jammed a piece of copper sheathing, probably dropped by Orson, now mashed thin. There, she said. Micah knelt, reaching. No hands, she snapped. He stopped. She took the long wrench, lay on her side on the dry edge of the ballast, and worked its jaw into the gap. The metal was slippery. The first pry did nothing. The second sent pain up her wrist. The third freed a flake the size of a spoon. Micah held the lantern low. Sweat ran into Cora's eye. She blinked it away and saw the copper glint deeper in the points. The track began to hum, not the water, not the flywheel. The track. Micah looked toward the dark mouth of the tunnel. It released. How long? Maybe 3 minutes. Cora shoved the wrench deeper. It slipped. Her knuckles struck stone even through the glove. She tasted blood where she bit her cheek. The copper would not move. Board, she said. Micah dragged one duckboard close. Not for crossing. Wedge it under the handle. Together, they braced the duckboard against the stand. Cora wrapped both gloved hands around the insulated remains of the grip. Micah took the lower part using his bandaged hand and good elbow. The handle fought them, then moved an inch, then kicked back with enough force to knock Micah to one knee. He gasped. The hum grew louder. Cora heard it now as a shape in the tunnel, a rolling weight traveling through darkness with no care for boys, drifters, history, or rooms arranged by careful dead hands. Again, Micah said. Your hand. Again. They pulled. The handle rose. The points below groaned. Cora felt something tear in her shoulder, a hot line under the skin. The copper wedge bent. She planted one foot against the concrete curb and pulled not with her arms, but with her back, her legs, all the miles she had walked because no one had saved a place for her. Micah made a sound like he was lifting a house. The handle slammed over. The target plate spun from red to white. The indicator needle leapt to drag. Pin it, Cora shouted. Micah grabbed the steel pin and tried to shove it through. The holes were close, but not perfect. The pin struck metal and bounced. He tried again. The train was no longer a hum. It was a body in the passage, wheels striking joints, air pushing ahead of it warm and oily. Cora snatched the pry bar from where Micah had dropped it. No, not the pry bar. They had left it behind. She had only the wrench. She jammed the wrench handle through the locking loop instead of the pin. It fit badly, at an angle, but it held the stand from springing back. Move, she shouted. They dove behind a concrete buttress as the engine burst through the tunnel. Its headlamp filled the alcove. The gray engine struck the switch, tilted, corrected, and took the left curve. 3 bin cars followed, wheels shrieking. The last car clipped the stand chain, and the wrench jumped in the loop. Cora grabbed Micah and held him down as the handle quivered, trying to kick free. The train went left, into the sand drag. For one breath, there was only speed. Then, beyond the curve, the drag took it. The sound was not a crash at first. It was a deep swallowing. Sand and gravel had been piled there to receive runaway cars, and the train drove into it like a fist into meal. Metal shrieked. The engine's wheels ground down. The first bin tipped, dumping wet ballast in a heavy rush. The second slammed into it. The third folded its coupler and stopped so abruptly the entire tunnel seemed to bow. Dust rolled back over Cora and Micah in a thick gray wave. They lay coughing behind the buttress. The lantern had gone out. Somewhere, an alarm bell rang. Slower now. Not warning, but reporting. The track under Cora's hip quieted. Micah laughed once. It startled both of them. It wasn't happiness. It was the body emptying fear in the only sound it could find. Cora sat up, coughing grit. "We pinned it." "We didn't pin it." His laugh turned into a cough. "We insulted it until it obeyed." Same trade in most towns. This time he did smile, barely. The smile vanished when they heard Orson behind them. "You broke my line," he called from the passage. "You hear me? You broke money right out of my hand." Cora pulled Micah deeper behind the concrete buttress. Orson came into the alcove with his lantern swinging and the pistol loose in his other hand. Blood ran from a cut over his brow. Dust had turned his beard gray. He saw the engine buried in the sand drag and the cars crumpled behind it. He saw the switch stand held by the crooked wrench. His face folded into a look Cora understood too well. A poor man watching the thing he meant to steal become harder to carry. "There's copper in here older than my father," he said. "Brass, tools, cable, a whole buried works nobody owns." Micah stepped out before Cora could stop him. "My grandmother owns enough to tell you no." Orson laughed. "That bellwoman is in a hospital bed." A roll of thunder passed over them, closer than before, and rain began to strike the ground above with the sound of thrown gravel. Water answered underneath. The channel beneath the grating rose against its stones. The gauge beside number 6 crept past 46. Micah looked at it and went pale. "Heron Gate." "What is Heron Gate?" Cora asked. "The floodgate for the lower rooms," he said. "If pressure keeps climbing and the governor is jammed, it won't close by itself." Orson lifted the pistol when Micah moved toward a cabinet. "Stop right there." Cora raised both hands, not because she surrendered to him, but because she needed his eyes. "You want salvage? Then help keep it dry. If that gate fails, this place fills from the bottom, and your copper goes underwater with the rest of us." Orson looked at the gauge. The needle ticked higher. Greed could survive almost anything except a clear picture of loss. "What do you need?" Cora asked Micah. "In that cabinet. Manual crank. The socket is across the rails." The crank was a heavy T-handled piece of iron with wooden sleeves on both grips. They set one duck board over the rails, not enough for comfort, only enough for a single careful step. Cora crossed first with the crank, hugged to her chest, moving slower than fear wanted, keeping the iron from touching rail and wall together. Micah followed with his wounded hand pressed to his shirt. Orson stayed back, pistol lowered now, his courage shrinking as the test lamp glowed blue-white from the live return. They set the crank in the wall socket. A label above it read, "Heron Gate Manual Closure, 100 turns minimum." The first turn barely moved. The second woke gears behind the concrete. By the 10th, Cora's torn shoulder burned. By the 20th, Micah's bandage had bloomed red. Rain hammered overhead. The water channel frothed beneath the grate. Orson kept saying that was enough, but neither of them answered. At 50 turns, a light appeared beyond the sand drag. It bobbed on the far side of the buried train, small and white and impossible, climbing over wrecked iron and spilled ballast. Then a woman's voice cut through the thunder. "Micah Bell, if that is you making me climb over Larkspur with hospital knees, you better be less dead than you look." Micah stopped, as if the voice had put a hand on his heart. "Graham? Turn that gate, boy." Ruth Bell came through the dust, leaning on a cane, a hospital blanket pinned over her shoulders, and a battery lantern in her hand. A county nurse followed, wet to the skin and furious with worry. Behind them came a tall teenage girl carrying a bicycle lamp tied to a broom handle and a red flare pistol held with both hands. Ruth turned the lantern on Orson. "Orson Pike, sit on that toolbox before I explain your family history to this nurse in alphabetical order." He stared at the flare pistol, then at Ruth, and sat. Cora and Micah kept turning. The bell rang at 97. Ruth called, "10 more after the bell, not after you wish for it." At 110, a deep boom traveled through the walls. Water struck iron and stopped. The gauge dropped in a trembling sweep from 48 to 39. The roar under the floor lost its teeth. Cora let go and almost fell toward the rail. Micah caught the back of her coat and dragged her against the wall. For a few seconds, neither of them could speak. They listened to the buried works settling into a safer rhythm. Ruth reached them slowly. She took Micah's bandaged wrist and looked at the blood, the grime, the living boy attached to it. "You cut yourself on number 6. "Yes, ma'am." "You came alone." "Yes, ma'am." "You listened when the rail spoke." He swallowed. "Mostly." She touched his cheek with 2 fingers. "Mostly kept you alive." Then she looked at Cora, taking in the mud on her face, the torn coat, the gloves too large for her hands, the shoe dark around the sole where the hidden nail had worked blood through leather. "And who are you?" "Cora Bly." "Cora Bly, I am deciding whether to thank you first or scold you. Most people start with scolding. Most people lack imagination." Ruth pointed her cane toward the map room passage. "Nadine, keep that flare pistol on Mr. Pike. Miss Alvey, bring your bag. This girl is standing on a bad foot and pretending she isn't." They could not leave until the storm weakened. The false wall had become a waterfall, and the upper cut ran brown with branches. The hidden room became a workplace. Ruth directed from a chair. Miss Alvey cleaned wounds and pulled the nail from Cora's shoe. Nadine watched Orson, and Cora sorted rope, insulators, and lantern glass because work was easier to trust than kindness. As evening thickened, the place explained itself through use. The pump drew clean water from a sand filter hidden behind 3 flat stones. The lights ran from the millrace wheel when the belt was sound. The rail was not a ghost line, but a flood system, built to move ballast and reset gate weights when the river rose. A ledger board held brass tags, each stamped with a name and notched at one edge. People had hung them when they entered during flood or trouble, then taken them down when they left. Cora read the names under lamplight: Grange, Bell, Freeman, Coles, Baptiste, May, Green. Some plates carried 2 names close together, adult and child. Ruth saw her looking. In 1931, the river came east at midnight. Company men locked the brick storm cellar for payroll records and office families. Black section crews were told to wait in tool sheds. Letha Grange was signal tender in every way, except the title they refused to print. She opened the old works, and crews, masons, welders, washhouse women, and children built a shelter under a town that would not shelter them. Afterward, the company called it unauthorized and buried the plans. The people who lived kept their own record. Micah listened with his whole face, though he must have heard pieces of it all his life. "Why keep it running?" Cora asked. "Because water does not care whether a thing has been forgotten," Ruth said. "The river still rises. The gate still needs ballast. Every few years an office rediscovers the levee and forgets the works below. Every few years somebody with more conscience than permission oils what must move." The blue drawer Micah had come to retrieve held those records: copied easements, maps, maintenance lists, and proof that Ruth's small house above the gate sat on trust land, not county land, for easy sale. Miss Alvey wrapped the papers in oilcloth and hid them in her medical bag. People are less likely to steal bandages than history, Ruth said, though I would not stake supper on it. Near dawn, they emerged through a corrugated door hidden under sycamore roots. The storm had changed the world. The cut ran brown on both sides of the raised track. A cottonwood lay across the bank with its roots lifted like a wall. Floodwater covered the fields beyond, turning fences into lines drawn through glass. Deputies waited there, late enough to be dry under their hats, and early enough to look official. One recognized Cora from Bracken, from the fruit crate, and the order to leave. Ruth stepped between them. This girl kept Heron Gate from failing while your office was deciding if rain was wet. The deputy closed his mouth. Orson was led away with his cable cutters, his pistol, and a story no one cared to hear from the beginning. The papers from the blue drawer went with Miss Alvey to the courthouse, then to a lawyer who owed Ruth a favor from a flood he had been too young to remember, but old enough to profit from surviving. None of it solved everything. Paper never did. It only changed which doors had to pretend they were not locked. For Cora, the harder change was quieter. Ruth offered her the cot in the map room until her foot healed. Then came coins for harness stitching, pipe cleaning, and salvage. Then came the phrase, temporary assistant signal tender, spoken like a joke with a wrench hidden inside it. Cora kept one part of herself packed, but the part grew smaller. But staying became made of tasks. She learned the sand filter, the gate line, the rail current, and the old engine's name. Larkspur, a pretty name for a dangerous thing. With mica, she rebuilt number 6, replacing the sheared pin and fitting a new insulated grip. She kept the twisted copper that had jammed the points, drilled it, and tied it to Micah's satchel as a bright warning. Nadine came after school to help clear the upper vent. Miss Alvey stocked a medical shelf. Men from Bracken arrived with bolts and belts and apologies so badly. Maid Ruth sent 2 of them home to try again. The deputy who had chased Cora from town delivered insulated wire without meeting her eyes. At the old semaphore, Cora scraped vines from the warning board. Beneath the weathering, she found the original words. Do not touch rails. Live return. Listen before crossing. She repainted them in black. Underneath, after a pause long enough for the brush to drip on her boot, she added another line in smaller letters. Go slower than scared. Ruth stood behind her with Micah and pretended to object. That is not regulation wording. No, ma'am. Good. When Cora's foot healed, Ruth handed her a strip of brass and a set of letter punches. Make your tag. Cora looked at the presence board. Living names hung on one side now, old names on the other. She had spent so long moving through places where no record wanted her that the small strip of brass felt heavier than it should. Temporary assistants get tags. Anyone I send below during high water gets a tag, Ruth said. I am sentimental only where records demand it. Cora set the brass on the anvil block. The hammer struck 5 crooked letters into it, then 3 more. Cora Bly. She filed the notch herself and hung it beside Micah's. The metal did not shine like jewelry. It shone like a tool. The repaired Larkspur made its next controlled run under a clean September sky. Cora stood clear with the switch list in her hand, Micah at the test lamp, Ruth by the gauge, Nadine ready with chalk. At 40 pounds, the governor released. The rail began to hum through the soles of Cora's new used boots. Her body remembered the ditch and the boy's hand on her coat. Fear rose, but it no longer owned the whole room inside her. It had rails now. It had rules. Micah looked at her. You clear? She checked her feet. The board, the lamp, the switch target, the distance to the rail. She listened before answering. Clear. Larkspur came around the bend, slow under brake, headlamp repaired, gray side washed, its name visible through new paint. It took number 6 left, toward the sand drag, dumped ballast, reset the gate weight, and rolled home with a tired iron murmur. Nadine chalked one clean mark on the post. "Correct action repeated under pressure," Ruth said. "Some trust earned," Micah added. "Some," Ruth said. "Never all." Later, when November brought the first cold flood and the county siren failed, people came to the ruined ice house carrying children, medicine, blankets, a birdcage, and one furious cat. They came because blue herons painted on fence posts led them there, and because Cora had hung lamps along the safe path before dark. Micah stood by the crossing in a slicker too large for him, calling, "Stay off the rails, use the boards, slow," slower than scared. Cora counted people in and hung their tags. The hidden room filled with wet breath, lantern light, tin cups at the pump, crying babies, whispered thanks, and the steady work sounds of water going where patient hands had taught it to go. It was not quiet. It was not hers alone. That, she had learned, was the point of shelter. A little girl pointed at the black rails crossing the floor. "Is that dangerous?" "Yes," Cora said. "Why is it in here?" "Because sometimes the thing that can hurt you is also carrying what keeps the door open. So we learn its rules. Can I touch?" "No." Cora glanced at Micah and smiled. "Don't touch the tracks." Far off, under rain and earth, the rail hummed once with the fading memory of a train that had passed safely and would come again only when called by water, weight, and need. Cora rested her hand on the brick beside the map, feeling the vibration through wall instead of iron. She did not feel trapped underground. She felt placed. For the first time in longer than she could measure, the sound of something approaching did not mean she had to run.